I've tried to base it around working at home. I've tried to give a few tips of the sort of things I've done, and there's a bit for people starting out, and it still won't show. So, right, a little bit about kit, and I really don't want to dwell on talking about kit, but it's a bit about kit for those that are just starting out on their photographic journey. So, you may be working with, idiot. Right, a bit about kit. You may be working with a basic kit, which is a camera with a modest zoom lens, a tripod with a head, some sort of remote release, whether that be a wireless one or a cable one or whatever, and perhaps something to carry it in. And it doesn't have to be a camera case. You can wrap your camera in a small towel or some bubble wrap just to keep it from getting damaged. So I've heard lots of people say, oh, I've only got a really basic kit, I can't do natural history. Well, I would disagree with that. I mean, I've got a reasonably extensive camera kit that I've built over time, but I still have a basic kit. That's my basic kit. And it's just a short focal length zoom and a slightly longer zoom on a little Canon M3 mirrorless. And I have a small travel tripod. Cameras are so good now at higher ISOs that half the time I don't even take the tripod. So if I'm going out for a walk with the grandchildren, or we're just traveling light to visit a town or a city somewhere, I'll just take that, and it takes up no room in my bag at all, hardly. But surprisingly, with a basic kit like that, you can do quite a lot of natural history stuff. So things like this you could easily do. This is a fungus called dryad saddle, and it's huge. I mean, those braps, they're about the size of dinner plates. They're enormous. So that's well within the scope. So his close-ups are smaller fungi like this. These are just illustrative. They're not images or whatever put into a competition. This was taken on a walk in Lincolnshire with my grandson, and it was just a grab shot really. And I used a wide angle lens because I wanted to show that this fungi grows in birchwoods, which this is. These are hallucinogenic, so don't go picking them and trying to eat them. Or whatever takes your fancy, I guess. But so they're well within the scope of basic kit. This also is well within the scope of basic kit, just doing small cameos of nature. In this case, it's just autumn leaves dying back, and the background is an out of focus carpet of colourful leaves on the floor. So well within the scope of a very basic camera kit. Likewise, plant detail. If your basic camera kit lens won't focus quite that close, you can put a small filter on the front. They're very inexpensive. You can get a pack of four or five of these filters for 15, 16 pounds, and they vary in strengths. You just got to make sure you get the right filter size for your lens. So again, easily done with basic kit. Larger butterflies, easily done. This is a butterfly called the Wall. Not a great shot because it's on a really messy background, but with natural history, if that's where it is and it's not going to move, you either take the picture or you don't. And larger moths, this is as big, if not slightly bigger, than the butterfly I was just showing you. This is a red underwing and really, really large moth. Quite easy to do with basic kit. The dreaded grey squirrel, again, easy to do with basic kit. This was actually shot in the garden with a sort of modest telephoto, but these are so habituated in parks If you have a handful of peanuts, these things will come and eat virtually at your feet. So there's well within the scope of a basic camera kit. Likewise, feral pigeons, the town centre's full of them. You can get really close to them. This one was in the garden. They're an absolute pain. They land on the bird feeders, and unless you shoo them off, they'll stop there till they've eaten absolutely everything. So feral pigeons, easy to do. Smaller birds, you may think, well, that's beyond a basic camera kit. But actually it's not. You've just got to think of a way to approach the problem that's slightly different. So instead of pulling the bird to you with a long telephoto lens, you move the camera to the bird. And the best way to do that is set up a branch over a flat surface where you can put some seed down and just leave it for a few days, let the birds find it, let them get used to life. You just set up a dummy tripod. It can be 3 canes with just a little box on the top that approximates a camera, so that they get used to seeing it. And then after a few days, remove that, put your tripod there, put your camera on it, pre-focus on the branch, step back, wait for the bird to land, take the shot. You have to trigger it remotely. You can buy radio triggers now.
Shall I do it?
You everybody.
Sorry, get some feedback. So anyway, you can use small radio triggers. You can buy them on eBay now for as cheaply as £10, and they work fine. I've got one that I paid £11 for, and it was coming from China, and I thought, well, if I see it, I see it. And it came within 10 days, and it still works. I've had it ages. So yeah, you can do small birds. Your hit rate won't be as good as using telephoto lens, because obviously you can't look through the viewfinder. You're just pre-focusing and hope the bird lands within the depth of the field that you've set. But you will get some sharp shots. And try again. The arrows have stopped working now. Yeah, and this is a simple little setup that I made. That I take on holiday. If we're going to a holiday cottage and I think there's an opportunity to do some bird photography, I just take this along, and it's basically a flat bird table top, if you will. The sides are only there to stop the seed blowing off, and instead of having a post underneath, you just put some heavy feet on it so that the wind doesn't blow it about. Put your seed on, and then all this is a cane screwed to the side with a crocodile clip arrowdited into the top of the cane, and you just clamp a branch, and when the birds come in, 7 out of 10 birds will land on the branch first and then hop down to the seed, and you take your shot when the bird's up there, obviously. And it's the same principle as we were just talking about, but obviously without a telephoto lens, you'd be moving your camera up to that. So you can do an awful lot with basic kit. You don't need to rush out and start spending money straight away to do nature photography. So we'll move on to more advanced kit, and I don't want to talk about kit all night, so we'll do this quickly. So once you get into it, you may decide that you need a longer telephoto lens if you're doing birds or timid subjects or things that you can't get close to. If you're thinking about macro, you might want to buy some close-up attachments. And eventually, if you like it, you might want to move on to a macro lens. But, you know, don't rush out and buy kit. Try things first that are cheap before you spend money. You may want to buy specialist tripod heads for certain jobs. And obviously, if you're using large lenses, you may want a heavier tripod. So we'll have a quick look at kit, very quick. So telephoto lenses, we all know what they are. They start at sort of modest lens. This is a 70 to 200 zoom. That's a 300 prime lens, and that's 150 to 600 zoom. And they're the 3 zoom lenses I use. Different jobs for different lenses. I mean, the 70 to 200 zoom would be fine if you were walking around a zoo doing that sort of photography. It'd be okay with larger mammals or things like deer park and so on. If you're finding it a bit short, you can always put one of the smaller 1.4 converters on the back of it. That just goes between the camera and the lens and extends the focal length. And they do it 2 times. I prefer the 1.4, and you don't lose much light or very much image quality with that. I think with the ×2, your viewfinder image is getting a bit dark, but also I think there's a slight drop off in image quality with that one. And then obviously I use the bigger lens for the bird stuff and so on. So yeah, there's lots of choices. You move to what you think you're going to use the most. Close up, cheapest way to get close if you want to do macro is these filters. They just screw into your filter thread. You don't lose any light, and optically they're probably better than most people think they are. They might be a little soft around the edges, but if you want to get close to flowers, larger butterflies and things, they'll do the job without spending much money at all. Little step up from that is your extension tubes. There's no elements in those. They go between the camera body and the lens, and they just allow you to focus more closely to your subject matter. Rule of thumb, if you want to get life-size magnification, in other words, what you're photographing will be the same size on your sensor, you need to extend the lens's focal length by the same distance in extension. So if it's a 50mm lens and you want to work at life size, you put 50mm of extension behind. And they're all interchangeable. These are really old screw thread ones. These are the Canon ones that I'm using at the moment. So they're simple to use and will allow you to get closer. If you really get into macro, you might want to use a macro lens, and they come in varying focal lengths. This is Canon's 50. It isn't a true macro lens. It only goes to half life size. But it's great for doing close-up work. Things like fungi, wildflowers, it's fine. They do a converter to go on the back of it to make it work at life size. But when you add the cost of the lens and the converter, it's just as expensive as buying a 100mm macro lens that'll go to life size anyway and give you more working distance. So as a first option for your first macro lens, I wouldn't even consider it. This one's very specialist, and it only goes from life size to 5 times life size, and it's difficult to use. So again, it wouldn't be your first choice of a macro lens. Probably 85% of my shots for macro are taken on this 100mm Canon macro lens. Canon do a non-L series lens, which is still a good lens, and it's quite a bit cheaper than this L series one. Sigma do an 105 macro lens, Tamron do a 90 macro lens, and they are all good lenses. They all produce great results, and that would be my lens of choice for a first macro. This is a 180 macro lens, and I really would only use this if I thought I needed the extra working distance because my subject matter was timid and not easy to approach. And this will go to life size as well. So that's your macro lenses. What you might want as well is to get some flashlight involved, because when you get really close with macro lenses, your body starts to block light from your subject. Easiest way to do it is just take your ordinary flash gun, take it off the hot shoe, connect it with a dedicated cord so that you can get the light up front to the business end. If you shoot a flash in the hot shoe, it'll miss your subject. Your subject's going to be right down here under your lens. A step up from that is a ring flash. Canon's ring flashes are getting really expensive. It's about £500 or more. You can buy a young Nuo one for about £80–90, and it'll do exactly the same job. Same for the twin flash setup. This is eye-watering now. It's about £900, but young Nuo do one, £150, and it'll do everything this one will. Might not be as well built, might not last as long, but you know, hell of a lot cheaper. And a final note on a more advanced kit is you may choose a different tripod head. If you bought a basic tripod, it's either come with a sort of rudimentary ball head or a pan and tilt head. If you're using long lenses, gimbal heads are absolutely fantastic. The big heavy lens and camera body, once it's on this and balanced, is effortless to move. It weighs next to nothing, and this swings like a kiddie swing up and down, and that rotates around the central axis. So you can pan, tilt, point up, point down with ease. They're an absolute joy to use. It can be quite expensive, you know, if you go for top of the range carbon models, they're over £1,000. But on eBay, you can buy a Chinese copy for about £60. And I had used one of those for about 2 years. And it did start to get a bit sloppy, and they are a little bit agricultural in use, because where these run on bearings, the cheap Chinese copies tend to run on nylon bushes, and things do get a bit loose after a while. But they're a great starting point. £60 is much cheaper, and this particular one's a Benro one, and I think they're about £250 now. I use a ball head, but it's good to use one with a friction control, and that's pretty good for stuff that doesn't need really critical framing. What I use for some of the macro work, and the great for landscapes as well, is a geared head, and they're absolutely fantastic to use. Excuse me. You can disengage the gearing with these cogged wheels, so that you can make gross movements in 3 axes. And then when you get it roughly to where you want it, you let go of that and it re-engages the gearing, and then you get really precise positioning with these wheels here. And unlike ball heads, where quite often, even with good ball heads, you can position the camera, tighten everything up, and then when you let go of the camera, you get a little bit of creep and the nose end of the lens drops a little bit, and you don't get any of that with the gear head. I would absolutely recommend a geared head for landscape, as well as anything that needs precise framing. And that's all I want to say about kit. And it was really for the people who are just starting out and need a bit of advice on kit. So that is it. Right, working locally. We've all had a year of not being able to go anywhere. And so we've been stuck to local parks. Even the local nature reserves have had only limited access or no access at all. And allotments, a lot of people have allotments, and what you can do in a garden, you can do on an allotment. So I'm going to look at working as local as you can get, which is your garden. Your garden, your outdoor space. If you haven't got a garden, a lot of the things you do in the garden, you can do in one of your local parks. Williamson's Park in Lancaster is quite good, because there are, although there's a main path system that can be busy, there are loads of little side paths and little quiet spots where you could sit and do some wildlife photography. So obviously, working in gardens, I'm going to be using my garden as an example, because that's the nearest space for me to work. So this is my garden. It's not as big as that image makes it look. It's shot on a wide angle lens. So it's probably about 28 foot across and perhaps 55, 60 foot long. This was shot last week. So, you know, we've still got just 1 or 2 spring flowers starting to come through. There's an azalea coming into flower. What you can't see on this is there is a mountain ash tree off to this side and a small bird hide that I built, which I couldn't get in the frame. And on this side, there used to be a silver birch tree, which got dangerous and I had to fell it. And I've now planted an ornamental hawthorn, which has the benefits of flowers in spring for the insects and then berries for the birds in autumn. So that's the bit you can't see. And I'm sat inside an arbour, which is probably 6 foot wide and about 5 foot deep, with a cover on it. So that's my garden. So, to have a garden that encourages wildlife, or a wildlife garden, it doesn't have to look like a wilderness. You can still have it looking like a garden, but there's lots you can do to bring wildlife in. And you sort of think of your garden as almost like an outdoor studio. So providing food for birds is the easiest way to start bringing wildlife into your garden. Quite often people put feeders out and then they don't get birds for a few weeks, and the food goes off and they dump it and give up. But birds, in a way, are much like people. If a new restaurant opens in your town, you don't necessarily know about it in the first week or the second week. It might be a week or two, 3 weeks, 4 weeks before you realise it's there. And it's the same with birds. They've got to find it. They've got to find the food. And once they find it, they'll keep coming as long as there's food there. You've got to give wildlife an incentive to come into your garden. So during the winter, I have a feed station set up on one of those patios in front of my bird hide. But when it gets to this time of year, when the birds are busy nesting, I stop photographing them to just let them get on with nesting. They don't need the added stress of me clicking shutters at them and so on. So at this time of year, I have a bird table at the house end of the garden so I can watch the birds. And then at the other end of the garden, which backs onto a field with a few trees, I have some of these feeders on hooks. And that just keeps the birds coming to the garden during the time I'm not actually photographing them, because you don't want them to wander off and start going elsewhere. You want them to feed in your garden. So that's the easiest way to get wildlife into your garden. Log piles. This is a bit of a tree I said I felled, and that's a pile. What you couldn't see on the photograph of the garden is there's a dip in the middle with a pond, and these are down next to my pond, and it provides shelter for small rodents, newts, which they are terrestrial. They spend a lot of time on land but return to the water to breed. Obviously frogs, toads, so it's shelter. Excuse me. It's shelter, and they will appreciate that. Add some water. Even the smallest garden, you can add some water. This is my pond. I put it in. I've 3 sons. They were all born within 4 years, and when they were young, we put this pond in. So it's been in at least 29 years, I would think. And it's the same liner. There's never been any issues with it. I've only had to patch it once, and that was because one of my kids pushed a stick through it. So other than that, it's held water, and it's amazing how quickly wildlife finds your pond. And you start with insects, water snails. You buy plants, there might be an odd egg on the plant, and wildlife finds the pond very quickly. And of course, the birds appreciate it to drink. You don't need a huge pond. I've seen frogs laying spawn in puddles. So, a tiny pond, 3 foot by 2 foot, will still attract some wildlife. If you really haven't got room for that, then a bird bath, something like this. The birds will appreciate it. They'll drink from it. They'll bathe in it, and they're all photographic opportunities. So that's the very bird feeder. That's a starling having a right old time splashing around in it. So, if you put water there, wildlife will use it. Provide her a home, or a place to raise young. You get these bug houses in garden centres. Some of them are quite fancy shapes. They're quite expensive, but they're really easy to make your own. This is one I made quite a few years ago, and they just sawn up bits of cane in the bottom. It's quite tall. It's probably about 3 foot high. It's next to my garage, and the next level's got fir cones held behind lats, and then the top bit's full of straw behind a mesh to hold it in place. And I get lots of solitary bees using these tubes nesting. And when you've got solitary bees, you attract parasitic wasps as well, because they want to lay their eggs where they can hatch on the caterpillars, not caterpillars, the grubs of the solitary bees. The tree I felled that I was telling you about, there's about a 2-foot stump there, and instead of digging it out, I've drilled it full of holes again for places for solitary bees to use. So it's all about attracting more and more wildlife. If there's things there for them, they'll stay when they come. Nest boxes. I've got several dotted around the garden. This long one with 3 holes is for sparrows, and they are social nesters, and they like to nest in a terrace. Sparrows had a massive decline in numbers a few years back, and I stopped seeing sparrows in the garden for almost 5 years, but they're back again now. And so I thought it'd be really good to encourage them to breed. So I put this sparrow terraced up about 4 or 5 years ago. It's homemade. And I've had 2 great tits and a blue tit nest in it. The sparrows haven't even looked at it. So, you know, you can try and help, but they don't always use it. And then I've got some single nest boxes like this and a couple of open nest boxes like that. And they do get used. So again, it's providing something for wildlife. They're not going to come to your garden if there's nothing there for them. And then planting flowers, trees and shrubs that are attractive to wildlife. So this is the hawthorn I was telling you about that I planted in place of the silver birch that I felled. That's probably about 9 foot tall now. And this blackbird stripped it of berries in about 2 or 3 days. And so it was there, and I could photograph it because it was in the garden. And also plants are always very, very good for, if you get the right plants, for attracting insects and bees. And the good thing is now, with a lot of the seed companies, they actually put an emblem on the seed packets telling you if the variety of seed you're buying is insect friendly and bee friendly. So that's a bit about attracting wildlife to your little outdoor space. Excuse me, I've had a terrible cough for about a week, so I shall just take a drink. So we'll move on to what do you do once you get them there. So photographing birds in the garden, you know, it's very convenient. It's literally out your door and you're in your outdoor studio. So what you're looking for, or certainly what I'm looking for, are very natural looking shots like this. You know, please don't do that. It's an awful shot anyway, but I see lots of shots going into competitions of birds on feeders. And the only people who want shots of birds on feeders are the companies that make feeders, or the people who sell the seed that's in it. And even then, they wouldn't want a grubby feeder like this. They'd want one of their brand that was pristine, brand new and out of the box. So just don't take these shots because they just don't look good. So you, as I said, you're looking for something natural. But at the end of the day, is that all it seems? Because that was the full frame. So what you're doing is you're using the food and the feeder to attract the bird, but you want a natural shot. So you put a branch below the feeder or sometimes above it. And not every bird will land on it. Out of every 10 birds, 3 will probably go straight onto that little pin. But the others will go on the branch first, because when you're flying in fast, that is a much easier target than that little metal pin there. So depending on what bird lands on the branch, you've got a short period of time to get your shot. I've done this purely to show the setup. I would frame the bird without that in the shot, obviously, but I did it to show that you know what's being used to attract the bird. Things like this coal tit will land on the branch, and you will literally have about a second if you're lucky, and it will hop straight on there. Blue tits will land there. They'll hang around 3 or 4 seconds before they go. So just get to know the birds in your garden and their behaviour. Some birds you don't have a lot of time to shoot at all. Other birds will give you a little bit more time, and you might get a burst of 8 or 9 shots. Great spotted woodpecker. It's a female great spotted woodpecker, and that's in my garden. But again, is it what it seems? The timber there, the tree, has some small holes drilled in it, and they're baited with suet. So of course the bird is coming there because it's getting fed. And I don't have dead trees standing around the garden. So that's the reality of it. This is my wife's washing pole, the washing line fastened to it, and it has this hoop of metal there. So you put a heavy duty hook, much like a pot hook, but more heavy duty. Hook it in there so that it takes the weight of the log, and then just stabilize it with a few cable ties. And I have 4 or 5 different logs that I can swap and change, you know, so that I'm not always photographing woodpeckers on the same post. They don't know it's not a tree. You know, it might look ugly to us. They don't care. They're being fed, and it looks like just any other dead tree to them. I've had woodpeckers coming in the garden now for probably 6, 7 years now. Won't be the same woodpeckers because I don't think they live quite that long. So, you know, it's a continuation of woodpeckers bringing their fledglings to feed, which in turn keep coming. And as long as you feed them, then you'll keep them coming. So to sort of recap on that, really, your garden in essence is an outdoor studio that you can use, you know, so use it like that. Think about where the light's coming from, what light is best for certain subjects. Think about the background. Can you throw it out of focus? What colour will it give on the image? Use attractive and appropriate props to enhance your images. Think about how you're going to conceal yourself from timid subjects, because some birds, the woodpeckers for a kickoff, will not come in the garden if they can see you in the garden. Spend a little bit of time just tucked away in the garden somewhere, observing how the animals and birds behave in the garden. Look which birds come at which time of day, and so on. Well, all these things, you can't control nature, but all these small things will give you a little bit more of an advantage when it comes to getting you the shots you want. And think about taking shots in different weather conditions as well. So that's my little hide in the garden. It's only tiny, it's a metre square. I did look at ready-made small garden sheds. But when you put into the cost, cutting bits away, building opening bits and so on, it was cheaper just to buy the wood and make one from scratch. And, you know, I'm retired, so I have enough time to do a little project like that. And I built the whole thing for, I think it came in rounding about £200. If you look at this bit, looks like there's a lens poking out there. That's actually a piece of wooden fence post painted black with a plant pot screwed on the end of it, a black plant pot. And during the months where I'm doing bird photography, I open the hide in the morning and I stick this out. So even if I'm not taking photographs, the birds get used to seeing something poking out through the hide. This is just scrim net, used by the military. You can buy it on eBay. It's cheap and it just breaks up your outline. And I know Gary's been up and used my hide, and I'm sure Gary will back up what I'm saying. But when you're sat in there and that scrim's there, if somebody walks in the garden and looks in, they cannot see you. And I think the only time birds realise there's somebody there is if you make too sudden a movement with the lens, or you haven't got your hands covered, or you get your face really close to this. Because unfortunately, us Northern Europeans with pale white skin basically might as well have 3 white flags to wave around. So if you move your hands, you move your head, they're very noticeable in a dark area. And so I tend to wear just fingerless gloves in a dark olive green and try not to get my face too close to the front. If you haven't space to build a tiny hide, you can just as easily open a window and sit in your garden shed and use your garden shed. If you haven't got a garden shed, you can get small portable hides like this. They're just like a little pop-up tent. They fold up in exactly the same way as the big Laster light reflectors. So it's a metal hoop on 4 sides with just a canopy over. And it all flattens down and they fold just the same, but they're much stronger metal hoops. So when you've got 4 of them together, it takes a little bit of muscle to twist them back down. And it packs down into a circular disc about 2 foot across, and it has 2 shoulder straps that you can just put on your shoulder. And you can move this around the garden wherever you want to. And I used it a bit in the garden before I built the purpose-built hide. So, and failing all that, you can sit in a shady corner of the garden with a little bit of sort of military scrim and a dark coloured jacket or a camouflage jacket, and just sit quietly and blend in, and you will still get the birds coming in. So there's lots of different ways to conceal yourself. So a few bird images, blue tit. I've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures of blue tits. And every time I go out, I say, don't photograph any more blue tits. And the minute one lands, I fire the shutter because they're just such engaging little birds and you just can't resist photographing them. So I've literally hundreds of them. Jay, I've had jay coming in the garden for quite a while now. They are very, very shy birds, and I set the feeder up for the jay. It's usually a branch that's baited, and I'll put that way down the bottom of the garden because they are quite timid birds. I think the only time of year where they're a little less timid is in autumn, when there are abundance of acorns on the floor, and they get so preoccupied with collecting acorns that you can actually get a little bit closer. But the view most people get of a jay is its white rump disappearing off into the trees. But they really are a beautiful bird, and you know, they're certainly not like the rest of the crow family. They're quite striking. Funnily enough, photographers don't seem to really focus on the crow family, the corvids, which is a shame because they are quite striking birds in their own way, and I've taken quite a lot in the garden. That's the jackdaw, obviously a dark bird, so you've got to be really careful with your exposure if you want to get good feather detail. And if you get the right light, you can see the iridescence on the feathers, and it's going a bit green there and a bit sort of purpley there. And you can't mistake the jackdaws because they have this grey nape to the neck. Sometimes comes right up almost like a hood. So that's the jackdaw. This is a carrion crow. I've just had this in a recent competition. The judge hated it because he couldn't see the feet. It doesn't bother me. It isn't a great leap of the imagination to realise there's feet there. For any wild animal, the sort of, it's a very thin line between survival and not survival. And I can assure you, if that was on 2 stumps, it wouldn't last 2 or 3 days. So yeah, there are feet there, and I didn't mind it. I like the muted background, and I like the bird's stance, and I thought the feather detail was very good, and that sort of eye watching. But the judge didn't like it, but I won't lose any sleep over that. This wasn't in the garden. This is a chough, another member of the crow family. They are really, really quite rare. They're a coastal bird, and they tend to live around coastal cliffs. There's quite a few small colonies in Cornwall. There's some down on the Gower and the Pembrokeshire coast, and I believe there's some on the Isle of Man as well. But this bird was in Evesham, which is, as you know, just 3 or 4 miles down the road. And it turned up there, they think possibly a bird from the Isle of Man, and it hung around for two or 3 months, I think. And so I thought I'll go down and see if I can find it. And as you can imagine, there was no trouble finding it because there was loads of twitchers and photographers all there. with a sea of tripods and spotting scopes. So I knew exactly where to go to find it. And it didn't seem to mind at all. Very glossy birds, and so it's quite hard to get the feather detail. The only other places I've actually seen them in the flesh was on the Gower Peninsula, and I walked across at low tide onto the Worm's Head, which is quite a rugged walk. And on the way back, I spotted about a dozen of these on the grass bankings above the little ledge of rock that you climb down to go across. And so I'll trail back the next day from the holiday cottage, carrying all my gear. And it's a bit of a walk from the car park to get down here, only to find there wasn't a single one. But again, that's nature photography. Another jay shot. This is a different part of the garden where the background's much further away, so it gives you this much softer, mellow appearance to the background. Greenfinch used to be the most popular finch in the garden, and then their population crashed with they had a disease that spread like mad several years ago, and so I had an absence for quite a few years, but the numbers are just starting to come back, and I see 2 or 3 in the garden now. This is a male, and this background is actually a shrub in my next door neighbour's garden. So I set it up so that I could get this soft green background. So just, when you're setting shots up, think about the background as well. Is it lit with the same light as the bird? Is it darker? Is it lighter? Think about backgrounds. Things don't always pan out. I'd set this as a target bird for that morning's photographic session, and I had this branch stretching out with a feeder there, and this is just the stump that was sticking out the other side of the feeder. So this bird landed on it, all nicely fluffed up, nice paws on this awful branch, but it was either take the shot or miss it. So I took the shot. I like the way the bird looks, hate the way the branch looks. But again, that is nature. Wrens, one of our commonest birds, but we don't often see them out in the autumn. They tend to grub around in the bottoms of shrubs and undergrowth looking for insects. And so they're not always out in the autumn where you can get a nice clean shot. This was early morning and it was very overcast, and you can see the light's really cold. This privet edge in the background's almost a blue-green. And if I was putting this into a competition, I'd do a bit of work on it. I'd certainly warm the background up, which you can do. You go into Adobe Camera Raw, you can change colour temperature. So it'd be well worth doing, but quite charming little birds. This is the opposite end of the scale. This was shot late afternoon. It's a female chaffinch, and as you can see, it's really quite warm. Like if I was doing anything with this, I would definitely tone that down slightly. Bullfinch. There's a couple of these slides I shot, not in my hide, but in Phil Smith's hide. He gave us a talk when we were down at Priory Hall, probably about 5-6 years ago. And he has a hide that can accommodate about 4 people, and a feeding station outside, which is set in, it's set up pretty much like mine is. And that was taken there. I do get bullfinches in my own garden, and I've got some shots of them, but I particularly like this bird because it's a really healthy specimen, good plumage, a nice healthy looking bird. And they are a striking bird, bullfinch. Nuthatch. This again was at Phil Smith's hide, but again, I get nuthatches in my own garden as well. Robins. Loads of people say, I've got a robin in my garden, but it's probably over time several robins. They've only got a very short life. So that robin you've had hanging around your garden for 5 or 6 years, there's probably 3 different robins at least. This is late afternoon, and again, quite warm light, quite close to the hide there. This is really in your face, song thrush. Starlings, even if you've got the tiniest or the urbanest of spaces outside, you should be able to attract starlings. If there's food there, the starlings will find it. And I love them. I love the, what appears to be a drab bird at a distance when you look close. The iridescence on the feathers and the speckling, they really are quite attractive birds. Messy and noisy. Great tits, get lots of them in the garden. This one again was shot at Phil Smith's side, but I've lots of shots that I've taken in the garden as well. Long-tailed tits, again. This was actually shot just on a shrub that's at the bottom of my hedge. And the background, there was a huge thunderstorm moving in. This was still in some sunlight, but that background is actually the sky. It was sort of inky dark thunderstorm. So, you know, look round your garden, see which bits you can use, think about backgrounds. This is a nuthatch. This one's in my garden. That's the privet edge down the side of my garden in the background. Slightly warmer light than the wren. It was really cold light when I took that. And female great spotted woodpecker. Again, this was on a cherry tree that we used to have in the garden, but it's not there anymore. My wife made me cut it down because it interfered with the washing. So that's that bit. So what we like for time, right? Seasons and weather. So yeah, go out at different times. Don't just wait for the nice days. So very autumny shot. This is a small stunted horse chestnut. Sorry, mine went blank. When my lads were little, they went out conquering, got these conkers, put them in a plastic bag, hid them under the bed in the bedroom. My wife found them a bit later, well, several days later, I think. And some of them had germinated, so the kids really wanted to plant them. So we planted 3. This was when the kids were 8, 9. They're all in the sort of mid to late 30s now. And we've still got 2 of them. One died. And they're about 9 foot high now, but they're sort of almost bonsai horse chestnut in sort of a 1.5 foot wide tub. And I can move them around the garden and use them as props, but they are living trees. They're not dead branches. The background was the shrub in next door's garden, which is catching late afternoon light. The leaves were turning autumn colours. It's quite bright because that was well lit with sun. The bird was in slightly more shade. So you get this effect. The next slide, same place, same shrub in the background, but a different look because this time the light's on the bird and the shrub was in the shade. So again, just think about how the light's going to affect your backgrounds. This is the one you've already seen, and although, you know, looking at it, there's green still there, you know it's autumn because of the berries. So, and again, another autumn shot. Winter. Don't let the snow put you off. Get out there, take some pictures. This is obviously a goldfinch. Snowstorm going on while I took it. You can see the streaks of the snow. And it'll give you some images with a different look. The jay in the snow, you can see the snow's starting to build up on the shrubs in the background there. Does make for a rather busy background, but you know, definitely showing the season. Robins, we have snowy post. I don't think there's a Christmas gone by in my memory where at least one person hasn't sent us a Christmas card with a robin stuck on a snowy post. And rain, go out in the rain. This is a male siskin. You can see the branch is wet through, drips coming off, it's streaks of rain, but you can still get shots in the rain. You know, don't let weather put you off. Spring, you can see the horse chestnut buds just bursting into leaf there. Again, spring, this is just a sprig of blossom put onto a bird feeder setup. If I was using it in a comp, I'd definitely clone that out and clone that out. But yeah, you know, try and depict other things with your shots, seasons, and so on. And this one, a bit harder to guess the season unless you know a little bit about birds, but this is summer, late summer. And this is a juvenile great spotted woodpecker. probably only fledged 3 or 4 weeks previous to this shot. You can tell it's a juvenile. It's still very, very slim, and it's got this red crest on its head. Normally juvenile woodpeckers have that. The female has no red colour on the head at all, and the male only has red on the back of its head, nape of its neck. So that is a dead giveaway that is a juvenile bird, and that's season's bird. I'm sure most of you have had a go at butterflies and insects around your garden, in the local park and so on. But a lot of people totally forget about moths because they're predominantly nocturnal. There are some day flying species. Cinnabar moths, you see a lot of those around. But yeah, a lot of them are night species, they're nocturnal. And a lot of people don't bother because they think they're all little brown jobs. And a lot of moths are brown and quite small, but there are some really striking moths. So in the UK, we've got 57 resident species of butterfly and 2 migrant regular visitors. One of them's the painted lady, comes across from the continent. And the other one's the clouded yellow, which we often get clouded yellows on the coast, just really from Cochrane down. They've been there quite a few times over the last few years, usually on long, warm summers. So that's 57 species and 2 visitors for butterflies. We have 900 species of large moths or macro moths, and then we have another 1,800 species of micro moths. So we've far more moths, many times more species than we have butterflies, but people don't photograph them that often. Moths and butterflies are all in trouble. They're all in decline. I'll just move this one because it's slid across. And since the 1930s, we've lost 65 species of moth and 4 species of butterfly have gone extinct. And they're struggling. They really are. So, moths. Oh, I have to click on it again. There we go. Moths. So, moth traps. People have an odd idea about moth traps. The word trap, people automatically think it kills the moths, but they don't. They just collect live moths. This is a commercial moth trap. It's a Robinson trap. There are different ones. There's a Skinner trap, actinic traps. But this is a Robinson, and the Robinsons work quite well. It's to buy them commercially, they're about £400 now. And at the end of the day, they're a shallow plastic dustbin with a bulb on top. And so for me, I thought that was quite a lot of money. But I was really keen to see what moth species came into my garden. And I suppose did a project really that lasted over a year, about a year and a half, photographing moths, which I sent the statistics of the moths are recorded to the local collator so that it was at least producing some useful information as well. And at the time I was shooting slide film, so I have hundreds of moth images, but they're all on slides. I have scanned a couple, which image quality is not great, but they're in there. So I didn't buy one because I thought they were extortionately expensive for what they were. So I made one, and they're not difficult to make. So there we go. This is my Mark IV moth trap, I think. I've built quite a few over the years. And they do weather and they get battered, and then I fancy a new one, so I'll build another. So this is a large plastic bin from Wilko's. I think it was about £5 or £6. And it's been in storage, so all these egg boxes are laid flat. But what you would normally do is arrange these so they've got nice spaces between them and a hollow section in the middle. And this is where the moths end up, and they settle amongst the egg cartons and just settle down, hunker down for the night. The lid, if you remember if you go back, it has a funnel on the top. So in a lid, there we go, there's the funnel. And I bought this funnel, can't remember whether I got this one off eBay. I did buy one from C&C Supplies, but that's about 10, 11 inch across that funnel. And you cut the spout off. So you've got to think about what's the biggest moth I'm likely to get. And you've got things like poplar hawk moths, and they are almost as wide as the palm of my hand. So you want a biggish hole. So you cut it off to that depth. All this is a timber frame with a sheet of opaque perspex screwed on top, with a hole cut in the middle, the funnel sunk into the hole. You've got to cut this all accurately. That's the main thing. Use your funnel as your initial guide, and then cut inside the line so it's a tight fit. And then just silicone seal it into place. And so that's what you end up with. So that's the catching part, and somewhere for the moths to settle down. And it is quite big, and it needs to be big. The moth traps are quite big. If you've ever been to Leighton Moss, as you come out the visitor centre and walk down as if you're going to make your way up the path to the public causeway, if you look on as you're leaving the building, if you look on the left-hand side, they have a Robinson moth trap set up permanently, and they empty it at weekends, and you can go along and you can look at the moths and so on if you're that way inclined. So that's that, and that's the business end. So that's 4 baffles and a bulb. This is ceramic bulb holder. It's silicone sealed around the bottom just to keep moisture out, and it is earthed because it's going to be out in moist conditions. I wired it up myself, and I'm happy that it's reasonably safe. I never touch it when it's live. I switch it on at the garage and walk away, and in the morning I go to the garage first, switch it off, and then go and move it. So just to be safe. What happens is the moth flies in and it starts to spiral around the light, and then it'll touch one of these baffles, which will stall its flight, and it drops down the funnel. So there you go. That's the business end, the light sat in the funnel. And this is getting really old. I've had it in 3 different moth traps. So I'm going to build a new one shortly. And I'm going to substitute the galvanized metal for perspex sheeting, you know, the acrylic sheeting. So that's it. That is basically your moth trap and your lead to plug it in. Bulbs, depends where you live. This is what they call black light. And if you live in a built-up area and you've got houses on all sides and a bright light is going to cause issues, you can run a black light. The thing is with the black light, it blocks most of the visible spectrum, but it emits lots of ultraviolet and infrared, which the moths can see. And so it still attracts moths, even though to us, even in pitch black, you have to walk right up to the moth trap almost, and you'll see a very faint purple glow on this bulb. I wouldn't look at it for too long because it is ultraviolet, which is certainly not good for your eyes. Some of you girls will recognise black light, I guess. It's what they always used to put in discos. They used to have black light. And when you went in your nice cotton summer dress, and then to your horror, when you got in there and all your underwear was shining through your clothes, it's because of this black light. And if you, as I say, if you're in a built-up area, that's great. It will attract moths. This is mercury vapor bulb, and I tend to favour this. I do shield it so it doesn't throw light back at my house and my neighbour's house, but on the other side of my garden, it's a field. So it doesn't really matter as long as I shield it from the houses. They emit a lot of visible light, but also loads of ultraviolet, and they will get far more moths to the trap than this. This will still get moths there. This will get a lot more, but in a built-up area, that would be a bit of a nuisance to the neighbours. So they're the two different bulbs, some mercury vapour bulb and a black light. And they're both available still, you can buy both. I know they're phasing out mercury vapour bulbs in large factories and things because of, you know, environmental savings and energy issues. They'll cost you about £9 or £10. You don't need a choke, you know, a starter unit for these. It's built into the bulb. So this will screw straight into an Edison screw and it'll fire up without any trouble. Same as the black light, you can pick these up for about £16 a bulb. And they both work, they both get moths. So that's your trap. And you switch it on at dusk, and then in the morning you go and empty it. And you'd be surprised. Summer, you'll get quite a lot, certainly with mercury vapour bulbs. I used to record them, and you know, Sally, when she was alive, used to come and help me to record them. And in summer, you could get a lot. One morning, we had just over 500 moths in the trap. 200 of them were the same species, but it was full, absolutely full. So a few images of moths from the garden. So that's an early thorn. Thorn moths are unusual in the way that they fold the wings up quite like a butterfly, up above the back, whereas most moths tend to fold them quite flat. So some medium-sized, biggish, I suppose biggish moth, and it has all these nice, you know, sort of rustic colouring on the wings, so quite autumnal. So that's the early thorn. This is it looks like a crazy sort of cartoon character, but I think I had this in the slideshow for mackerel last year, and this is a canary-shouldered thorn. Same family as the last one, but it's got this really strange fluffy chicken appearance. It's a figure of 80 moth. It's a fairly large moth. The Victorians could be quite sort of fanciful in their naming of moths. This one's called a figure of 80 because it's got this marking on its wing that basically looks like number 80. Not all moths are drab, brown, fluffy little things. This is a large emerald. I've done nothing to tweak the colour on this. You can see from the bark in the background that's just its natural colour. They really are that colour. They're, you know, they are quite vibrant green. And they're big, they're a biggish moth, you know, sort of pushing butterfly size, you know, say small tortoise shell. That's a common emerald, much darker bluey green, and it has this sort of checkerboard pattern on the trailing edge of the wing. Moths get tatty fairly quickly, much like butterflies do. So unless you get a pristine specimen, they're never going to look great. This is one of a whole family of moths called carpet moths. And in you know, if you're gonna look at moths, you need a good ID book. Lots of them don't have straightforward names. Some only have Latin names. But the carpet moths are a big family. In my guide, there's about 60 moths to a page, and there's 3 pages worth of these carpet moths. So this one is, you know, and they're not a huge moth. That's perhaps, I don't know, 1.5 centimetres across. This one is a red carpet. They get the name carpet moth because Victorians thought the patterns looked similar to the complex patterns they used to have on carpets. So that's a red carpet. This one's another one of the carpet moth family. This one's called the northern spinach. This one's the wood carpet. And they're an absolute devil to ID these, because they all look initially sort of quite similar, a lot of these, and it does take a bit of IDing sometimes. This one's the dark spinach, similar markings to the paler one, but much darker. This one's called the silver ground carpet. This one was quite an easy one to ID because it's quite a distinctive pattern. This is another wood carpet. We've looked at one, but this one has slightly different markings. All the markings are the same as regards where the zigzags are, where the two eye spot things are on the wing are the same, but they tend to vary in shade. Some are dark, some are light. Right, different family of moths. This is a burnished brass, and there's no sort of, you can guess why it's called burnished brass because of all this iridescent, coppery, brassy looking marking. Closely related moth is this beautiful golden Y. There's also a plain golden Y, which doesn't have as much of the dark markings on it and doesn't have this sort of goldy coloured spot there. So they do look similar, but when you get them next to each other, you can see the difference. This one's scanned from a slide, and I've only had 2 of these in the moth trap in all the years I've been doing it. It's a fairly large moth, and it's called the Herald, and it's got this really distinctive sort of shield-shaped body. This one I think I had in the macro one talk I did from the last presidency evening, and this is a pink-barred sallow. And if they hatched at any other time of year than autumn, the birds would pick them off. They'd stand out a mile with this bright yellow and pinky brown marking. But they come on the wing in autumn when all the leaves are turning, and so the markings are actually quite cryptic. These are a scalloped hawk. These are quite a big moth, and some mornings I'll have 3, 4, perhaps 5 of them in the moth trap. And these were just corks onto this piece of bark. And I just wanted to get the 3 of them together to just show the variation in marking. So you've got one quite pale one dark one, and sort of one in between. And some moths really do vary in their markings. This one's called a shuttle-shaped dart. And I guess the markings on the wing do look a bit shuttle-like. But this is quite a small moth. This is taken at more or less life size. And again, not all moths are drab brown. This is a swallow-tailed moth. This is a big moth. Again, probably about the size of a tortoise shell butterfly. This one I thought had escaped. It literally, I was going to photograph it and it flew off, and it landed on the back of this piece of bark that was face down on the table while I was doing the photography. So this is the underside of the bark that would normally be against the trunk of the tree. And so I was keen to get the shot before it flew again. And then when I checked it later, it's got all these little silver slug trails in the background. So you really, I could clone them out, but it's the wrong side of the tree bark anyway. So it's there to illustrate that not all moths are boring colours, but it's not a shot I'd ever use in a competition or anything. Right, getting on to the bigger moths. This is a poplar hawk moth. And as I say, this is probably almost as wide as the palm of my hand. They are a big moth. They're quite hard to photograph because this from here to there actually curves downwards and comes back up. So it gives them quite a bit of depth. So it's, you've got to watch the focus to see if you can get it all in. But they are a big moth, and I get quite a lot in the garden because there are some poplar trees nearby. This is scanned from a slide, so perhaps not as crisp as some of the digital images that I've got here. And this is a lime hawk moth. And I've had 2 of these in the trap. The first one was when I was recording. And although the guy who was recording moths at the time knew that I was recording moths, when I told him I'd got a lime hawk moth, he wanted to see it in person just to make sure I'd got it right. Because it put a new dot on the map, as they haven't been recorded in the area. But then when I thought about it, I had the moth anyway, so it was in safekeeping. So I just went down the road and there was lime trees. So I got a little bit of lime and thought I'll have it on its tree. But when I looked round, a lot of the roads on Bowerham were actually lined with lime trees. So not surprising it was there. This is elephant hawk moth. You've seen this one. I did it in the competition recently. And I get lots of these in the garden. And I've got 2 different types of honeysuckle growing in the garden, and it's one of the food plants. So, you know, why not put it on its food plants, take the picture. So that's what I did. That's a moth called a buff tit. These are a big moth, quite long. And you look at that and sort of try and make sense of it. But actually, when they're on birch bark, they are quite camouflaged. And they've got this very flat head. And if you imagine a snapped twig, you've got the bark down the side, and then a paler bit there where it's snapped off. So they sort of mimic, and then you've got this other spot on the other end. So they're mimicking a broken twig as camouflage. This is just a head-on shot of a lesser swallow prominent. You'll have to take the word from that, because you can't really ID it that well from this viewpoint. But I just thought it made a different shot. These big feathery antennae show that it's a male. They have receptors on there that when the females give pheromones off, they have a key that will latch onto a receptor on this, so that they know they're chasing their own species and not some other moth. This is a copper underwing. Again, quite a big moth, this, and it's called a copper underwing because you seldom see them parting the wings when they're at rest. But when that parts its forewings, the hind wing behind is brilliant copper colour. So, and this is one of the micromoths. It's not a macromoth, and I can't remember it. I think it's called a small magpie, but it's still quite big for a micromoth. And again, they're not all browned fairy things. This is an interesting moth. It's a big moth. It's called a pepper moth. And during the Industrial Revolution, this moth very quickly developed a sort of melanic form, a dark form, so that it was still camouflaged in the sooty urban environment. And when I first started running a moth trap, I used to get both. I used to get the speckled ones and I used to get the really dark ones. But now I tend to get more speckled ones as the air's getting cleaner. And this is an antler moth. It gets its name from this sort of, well, I suppose, if you stretch the imagination, a sort of antler shape on the wing. And this is a small moth. And you can see I'm quite close in. The scales are quite large. It is only a little moth. So there you go. That's moths. Lots of them. That's only a very tiny portion of all the moth shots I've got, but you'd find them pretty boring. But good fun to run a moth trap and see what's actually out there in your garden. You'd be really surprised. Butterflies, I've only covered the common ones you're going to get in your garden. So common blues you may or may not get depending on where you live. This is scanned from a slide. I actually had this one published in a book quite a lot of years ago. I made the front cover actually, but this one, meadow brown, common as anything. If you've got any fields nearby, you're going to get these in your garden. Thing is with moths and dragonflies and everything else, you're at the mercy of whatever they land on, and you can't always get a lovely soft background. So that's it. Dragonflies will always land on the tattiest bit of vegetation there is. Small tortoise shell. I'm sure we've all had a go at photographing them. Painted lady, that's a migrant species. It flies over from the continent every year. Red admiral, we all know. Speckled wood. About 10, 15 years ago, I'd never ever thought I'd see this in the garden. But they're, bucking the trend with butterflies, and they're a real success. They've expanded the range massively. They are a woodland bird, but I get them in the garden all the time now. And the peacock, which we've all seen and done. So they're what you're liable to get close to home in the garden. We have some good places for butterflies locally. We've got Duke of Burgundy Fritillary up at Gate Barrows. We've got lots of green hair streaks up on Burke Bank. So we've got some good places for butterflies. Wharton Crag's very good for butterflies. Other insects. This one's a mosquito, actually. It's a male, feathery antennas. So it's not going to bite you, it's not going to suck your blood. Only the females do that. This is a unnamed fly. I think it's one of the red-eyed flies. I took this some time ago, but I have never been able to totally ID it. And you sometimes get that. And I have a good selection of books that I've built up over the years to help me ID things. It's not always easy to, you think, oh, find it on the internet. But unless you know what it is to start with, what do you put in for your search? You know, you can narrow it down by putting fly with red eyes, but it will bring lots up. So it's useful to have some reference material. The trouble is the really good reference material that's written for academics are only published in small numbers. So it makes them really, really expensive. And so, you know, you go and find a book on flies and you find out it's 120 quid. So, you know, you just got to do what you can to try and get your IDs. But you can't, you know, good books, I can't recommend enough. Buying yourself some good ID books and just build them up over time. Shield bugs, this is a forest shield bug. I get lots of shield bugs in the garden. You'll find them anywhere, really, if you look close enough. Get the name, obviously, from this shield shape. That's a forest shield bug. Cockchafers, or maybugs, the other name. They're big. They're a big beetle, and they are mainly nocturnal. They're on the wing at night, which is perhaps as well because when they're flying, they are quite a big thing, and you know, a lot of people find them a little bit daunting. They tend to land in the moth trap. Funnily enough, some mornings I'll have 5 or 6 of these in the moth trap, and they come in like a bullet, and they hit the baffles on the moth trap and make a real ping, and then drop down into the collecting bit. Dragonflies, this is a large red damselfly, and I get these round the pond in the garden all the time. This is a nymph of a shield bug, and it just has a Latin name. It's Troilus luridus, and that's happily feeding around this poor clip beetle, and it's just sucking out its internals through this long mouth part. You wouldn't want to be an insect. Wasps, always good for photographs. Lots of different species of wasps, and they all have slightly differing face patterns. These are drone flies. I walked out the back door, and these were actually on the side of the house, just coupled up there. And I thought, photograph. They're bound to go by the time I come out with my camera. So I went in, got my camera, came back. They were still there, so it was really easy shot to get. As long as you've got the two flies roughly on the same plane, they're very sharp. That's just a ladybird nymph. They should be all over your garden if you look for them. This is a common blue damselfly. Blue damselflies, there are quite a few varieties, and it's hard sometimes to see the markings because the wings are folded over them. But I'm pretty sure this is a common blue. I found this next to the pond, just hanging on my privet hedge, and you can see from this, the hedge had just been recently cut, and it's newly emerged, and it hasn't yet got its full colours. It's all very pale and sort of pasty looking, but I'm guessing it's probably a common hawker or possibly a migrant hawker. More likely to be a common hawker. This one was shot at Leighton Moss, and this is a female broad-bodied chaser. And again, sometimes you just can't help it. If there's a busy background, there's not a lot you can do about it. You can't move it. You've just got to take it where it is. But I did like the fact that there's a lot of detail in the wings on that. So. Other flies, you get several species in even the most modest garden, as long as you've got plenty of flowers for them to come to. You know, the more variety of flowers you grow, the more insects you're going to attract. This is another shield bug nymph. This was inside a cosmos flower, just in the garden. Blue bottles, green bottles, flesh flies. They're all part of the blowfly family, and they're always around your gardens. painfully in your house sometimes. Remember before we talked about solitary bees, and then the solitary bees themselves attract parasitic wasps. This is one of the parasitic wasps, and to give you some idea of the size, that's the side piece of wood on the bug house that I showed you earlier. It's only a small portion of it. These things are tiny. It's called a ruby-tailed wasp. Really, this is about twice life size. And the ruby tail is covered by the wings, unfortunately, on this head over shot. But I've got another side shot. I put it in as a small file. It's not an image I'd use. It's not critically sharp, but it does give you some idea of the colour under those wings, which is really, really striking. I mean, those were the canes in that bug house, and they're not big. And this only covers a very small part of it. They're tiny things. Very common, but they're so little, most people don't even notice them. But that isn't critically sharp. And I would never, ever try and use it, just to give you an idea of what the colour was. That's at least 2 times life size, and I was hand holding. So, you know, out of 10 shots, you might get 2 sharp if you're lucky. Mating bees, these were just on my patio, on the floor, literally. I've never actually seen bees mating, so got the camera, took a shot. You've got to do it. Soldier beetles, get lots of them in your garden. Don't have to travel far to find them. So local areas. So, you know, you don't have to go a long way from home to find things. So reptiles and amphibians. Slow worms. Birkbank is really good for slow worms. I find them up there quite often. They're not a worm, they're not a snake either, they are a lizard, but they're a legless lizard. This is the common lizard. Again, this is up on Birkbank. Sunny days, where there's a little bit of warmth, I can almost guarantee finding one of these somewhere. Quite often on the boardwalk that goes across the bottom of the swampy bit. And they're not big at all. This is about life size. They're only tiny. I use the ring flash for that, which you can actually see. You can see the 2 portions of ring flash there. Newts. This is a new palmate newt, and you know it's a record shot. But this is a newt from my pond in the garden, and it's just shot in a small tank with some vegetation. Because really, it's the only way you're going to get a shot of a newt, unless you've got an underwater camera. Just a word about photographing amphibians. Do not put tap water in the tank and drop amphibians straight into it. It will not, you know, it won't do them any good at all. If you've got to use tap water, let it stand at least 48 hours. That'll let some of the bubbles go out of it as well, which will form on the side of the tank. Or if your pond water is reasonably clean, just put it through a little paper coffee filter just to get the particulates out and use that. It was just caught in a soft net, put in the tank for about 5-10 minutes and then returned to the pond. Not a baby frog, but a baby toad. This was up on Birkbank. Probably not been out the pond very long. They've just lost its tail. It's really, really tiny. This is shot at virtually life size on a macro lens. This is the adult version. Frogs, again, same little tank. This is a frog from the pond. It was lifted out very quickly, photographed, and then returned to the pond without any harm. You can tell this is a male, it's coming to breeding season. To get these dark patches here, which they call nuptial pads, and that's what helps them grip onto the females. And they seem to have a grip of death on the females. You've got to feel sorry for the females, to be honest. Another shot of a common lizard. This is the whole thing rather than the head. To show how small they are, I shot this at f16, and to get a frame filling shot, you can see the tail's already going out of focus there, and it's way out by the time you get there. So even at f16, this close, you haven't enough depth of field to get it all sharp. But they're quite nice little lizards, but they're not big at all, quite tiny. For the slow worm shot, one of the things you've got to watch with them is that they are quite sort of shiny, and they will pick up lots of highlights like this, and you can work on them and tone them down and so on. But yeah, a lizard, not a snake or a worm. And this is the tank we use. And you can see it's a double tank. So you've got a front tank which is larger, and that's where the clean water goes, or the filtered water. And then the back tank you fill with your pond water and your weed, and then beyond that, just use a piece of plain card. If it's sort of you're trying to give the look of a murky pond, you can use a brownish card or a pale green card. The reason you use a split tank like that is that if I introduce something into this tank, it's all one tank, it's just going to go straight into the weed and hide. If it's in a front tank with the background scenery, it can't go into that. It stays in an area where you can see all of it and you can get a clean shot. And it works really well. It's not big. I made it from just sheets of picture glass from some cheap picture frames out of Wilco's. These just the spines you put on folders, and they're there covering the ends of the glass, really just to protect my fingers from being sliced and to protect the animal you're putting in. And also they work for mammals. So this was taken years ago on a slide film, and it hasn't scanned that great, but it's just to show that you can use the tank in exactly the same way for small mammals. And I used to keep the bird seed in the garage, so I always got lots of little wood mice, and I have a little humane trap that's very similar to a Longworth trap that they use for field studies. And just put a little bit of nest material and some bait in there, catch the mouse, put him in your tank, photograph him and let him go. So the back tank has, I was trying to, I guess, emulate the bottom of a hedgerow. So the back tank has some deadwood, a bramble, some blackberries. The front tank just has some leaf litter on the floor and a few bits of seed here and there. So the mouse has got something to chew on, and they very quickly settle down and start grooming and things. So it doesn't seem to unduly distress them once they've been in there for a minute or two. So you get your shot and then let it go. And that's exactly the same principle. You're shooting through two tanks. And this is shot by flash. I often use flash for this. Put flash at 45 degrees on either side of the tank, and you do that to stop lots of reflections from the glass. And also put a black card in front of your face and just poke the camera lens through it so that you're not catching your own reflection on the front of the glass as well. You've got all these highlights in the mouse's eye, and that's because mice have eyes that are almost dome shaped. So there's the two flashes there, and these are all the specular highlights that I've just picked up in the rim of the eye. And so birds, we've got water all around us in Lancaster. We've got the canal, we've got the loon, we've got the seashore, we've got streams all over the place. So lots of opportunities for doing birds. So this one's a goose sander. It's a female goose sander, and I shot this on the canal. Outside of Lancaster, it was just the other side of Chewitfield Locks. When you get to the top of the flight of locks at Chewitfield, the canal goes into a culvert under the motorway, but you can go over the bridge and pick up the canal on the other side. Totally non-navigable, and it's very quiet up that stretch of the canal, and it's quite good for wildlife. This is one of the sawtooth ducks, so they've got a serrated edge to the beak, and they're fish eaters, and it helps them to hang on to whatever they catch. Grey lag geese with young. This They had 2 or 3 young. There's just one in the frame. And I shot this up at Leighton Moss. So again, local. Herons, find herons all over the place. You know, I cycle down the canal towpath sometimes now, sometimes past 2 or 3 of them. You see them out on the shore, on the Loon Estuary. Leighton Moss, this was shot at Leighton Moss. You see lots of them up there. So herons are all over the place, and they do make a nice subject. Obviously, they're up against the reed beds here, so it's a bit of a busy background. But yeah, nice bird. This is a coot with 2 of its beautiful chicks. They're just sort of not the prettiest of things. And again, very common. Lots of coots at Leighton Moss. There's coops up and down the canal, so you know you can shoot these anytime you want. Mute swans, again, common on the canal. See them up at Leighton Moss. So yeah, no problem finding them to take images. Just watch the highlights if you're shooting in the sun. These are hooper swans, and we get lots of these round sort of Cochrane area and so on. They're migrant. They come to us for the winter. I think I actually shot this shot at Martin Mere, actually, which is a bit further down the coast. And you've got an adult there. There's an adult at the back there somewhere, and then these three young between them. And you know, they're not too bad for flight shots because they're not that fast with being such big birds. This is a mute swan coming into land, and you look at the size of that, and you sort of think, how did they ever get off the ground in the first place? Yeah. This is a grebe chick, juvenile one. That was chick, yeah. So it's juvenile. That was at Leighton Moss. It's a little grebe, by the way. Canada goose again. Plenty of these about. You know, this is at Leighton Moss, but you can get shots of them quite easily. About 15 years ago, I felt really, really privileged to see one of these. It's a little egret, but because of global warming, they seem to be thriving in the UK now, and we're getting more and more of them in the commonplace. If I cycle down the old railway track down the Loon Estuary, I might see half a dozen on the sorry, I might see half a dozen of them on the estuary there. They've got these fantastic yellow feet, which you can just about make out there. Just look like they've walked through a tray of paint. And this one's paddling its feet up and down, and they do this to disturb small fish and small crustacea, and then they pick them off with that formidable beak. But quite a beautiful bird. Moor hens, again, all over the place. Lots of them on the canal. They're usually skulking along the side of the vegetation. This is a shoveler. So shot up at Leighton Moss. This is a male shoveler, and you can't mistake these for any other duck. They've got this enormous beak. It's absolutely massive. You wonder how they hold their head up. This is a male pintail. Again, Leighton Moss. So ducks, you know, easy going. Right, this one is a red-crested portrait, and I shot this actually at Martin Mere, and it was on one of the outer pools where you get the wild birds from the hide, and I thought it was an ordinary portrait, and then when I got it home and looked at it, and I thought, no, it's not. It's a red-crested portrait. They do breed in England, but there's only about 300 breeding pairs, and they all tend to be in the southeast. So if you drew a line from, say, the Bristol Channel across to the Humber, they're all on that side of the east side of that line. So I think this is suspect as a wild bird, and I think it's probably one of the birds from the collection at Martin Mere, and it's just managed to get itself on one of the outer pools, or it's been part of the breeding program they're doing there. I don't think it's a bird that's flown there from elsewhere. So I wouldn't use that in a natural history competition, because I can't say that it's not a captive bird. But it's a very attractive duck. Can't talk about birds that live near the water, I guess, without talking about beaded tits at Leighton Moss. We're really lucky to have them. If you look at distribution map for this bird of the UK, it's just plain white with a couple of really small red dots here and there. So they are few and far between and very, very sparse and spread out. And if you stand on the causeway looking at the grit trays where you tend to see these birds, and you're shooting with a 600mm lens on a crop sensor body, which on a Canon gives you the equivalent of a 940mm lens, that's how big they'll be in the frame, roughly. Even at the grit trays, which you think are quite close, that's as big as you're going to get in the frame. So a lot of people will obviously crop them. This is the sort of money shot, as you could call it, I guess, that most people go for. They want a shot of the birds doing this splits across the reeds. But the trouble is, everybody wants that shot. And so that's the shot that everybody tries to get. And they're the ones that get published. And so it's getting a bit tired now. So yeah, it's nice to try and get something a little bit different. I mean, this was nice because it didn't have any rings on, and they do monitor the beaded tits and they ring them, and some of the rings are quite fluorescent. So yeah, and again, when they're on the reeds, it makes for a very busy background. So that's another shot that's been cropped in a bit. You can see what I mean about the rings there, bright orange. This was a male on its own, and I fired a burst of probably about 10-12 shots. And when I looked at the back of the camera, the last two frames had a female that had just popped up behind him that I hadn't even noticed through the viewfinder. So that was an added bonus. I've got the male and female both in the same shot. But again, really busy background with all these reeds. Sorry, I must take a drink. This is, for me, I quite like this because the bird's further away from the reed bed and it's thrown it out a bit. Still a bit busy. And obviously it's much closer to the camera, so I haven't had to crop as much. Did notice it had this little white mark on its tail, but that would be no effort to clone out whatsoever. Again, further out still, the reeds are more thrown out. And I got these shots while the reserve was flooded, quite badly flooded. I mean, I've got big feet, you know, size 12 feet and big wellies, but it was only a couple of inches from the top of my wellies. So it was quiet. There weren't as many people around. And so I was able to get a bit closer to the birds. These were on the new grit trays on the other side of the reserve, not the ones on the causeway. And that was my favourite because it's really thrown the reeds way out. And you can see that this was, I think it was either F8 or maybe even been F10, I'm not sure. But it was so close that I couldn't get all the body in focus. So obviously this is what you want in focus, the feet and this. I'm not bothered that the tail's going out. But yeah, lovely little bird, and we're really lucky that we've got them. And you can wait a long time to get decent shots because it's very hit and miss whether they're going to be there. And that was just a grab shot on the day, and that's how flooded it was. That's the main causeway down to the public eye. And this swan here just swam past me on the path about a foot away from my leg, hissed at me a couple of times and carried on. So waders, quickly now, getting towards the end. Morecambe Bay, we're blessed with a huge expanse of mud on our doorstep. It's second biggest in the country. I think the Wash is bigger, but a nationally important place for wading birds. And as you all know, when the tide's out, it's a vast expanse, vast area, and the birds are scattered everywhere. But when it gets to high tides, they've all started to roost up on the rocks, the new sea defences, and so you can get some pretty close shots. So this is just a little group shot. So we've got 6 red shank there and 4 little turnstone at the bottom here, and you know, got the heads tucked in and they're roosting. They're just waiting for the tide to go out and get back out there and start feeding. This is a rock in the foreground, you know, out of focus. So it's not a great shot to use for a competition or anything, but it certainly illustrates what's available to shoot down there. Oyster catchers, likewise, you can get large flocks of oyster catchers. And if you're just quiet and patient, you can get quite close. And again, they're all up there because the bay's underwater. But it's a great place for shooting waders. Large groups of birds just pose a problem because obviously depth of field, you're never going to get them all critically sharp. So there we go. That's a red shank, close up on a red shank. Lapwings. People don't often think of lapwings as waders. Spend time inland nesting, and that's when people tend to see them doing the acrobatics over the fields. But if you go at the right time of year, the Loon estuary will have enormous flocks of lapwings out on the mud feeding. Quite an attractive bird. Looks like a curlew, but it's not. It's a whimbrel. And this again was on the rocks on the prom at Morecambe. You can tell it's a whimbrel rather than the curlew. They are slightly smaller, but unless you've got the two birds next to each other, you wouldn't be able to really tell. But the whimbrel has this dark band here running through the eye. Its plumage is generally a little bit darker, and their beak has a more, it's sort of straight and then turns in a kink, whereas a curlew's beak's just a little smoother, bit smoother curve. So that's a whimbrel, a bit more scarce than curlews, but it was a nice bird to see. It was a bit far away, but this is a ruff. It's a female ruff, and that's winter plumage for a ruff. These are black-tailed godwits, and these, I went to Leighton Moss, and there was hundreds upon hundreds had all arrived, and they were on the ponds. Massive flocks of them. And that's one on its own, grubbing around for something to eat. And again, this is the winter plumage for the black-tailed godwit. Gulls, great birds to have a go at just panning and practice flight shots on. There's any amount of gulls around our coast. This is the herring gull. This is the gull that gets all the other gulls a really bad name. This is a gull that's going to mug you on the prom for your fish and chips, the herring gull. And black-headed gulls, which actually only have black heads in the breeding season. In winter, their heads much paler, just like a little cheek patch. And this one's obviously just stood on one leg there on a post. But again, gulls, you can find gulls almost anywhere around the coast and in to some degrees inland. So, and occasionally you get little bonuses. So while I was shooting the waders, this little wagtail was jumping around on the rocks. So, you know, it would have been rude not to take its picture. Other seabirds, there are some seabirds we can't get around our coast. We've got mainly tidal mudflats. The tide goes out for miles, and the birds I'm talking about are the true seabirds that spend most of their life at sea, on the open sea, and only come onto land to breed. They need cliffs to breed, and they need, even at low tide, for there still to be plenty of water there so that they can fish. They eat fish, and they need access to that. So somewhere like Morecambe Bay, where the waders are feeding on small sort of crustacean and marine worms in the mud, is useless for these types of birds. So these are not birds that will get local, but I thought they deserved a mention. So this is the sort of habitat that they favour. These are gannets here. I think some of these little ones, they're a bit small in the frame, but there's some gannets in there, but I think some kittiwakes as well. So these are across on the Yorkshire coast at Bempton. Again, this is another picture of a gull. It's not the same one as the one you've just seen. Same gull, but a different frame. And they're also on all the coasts, whether it's cliffs, they're all over the place. So they're always a good target. These are kittiwake. You can see they've got rudimentary muddy nest on the cliff. A couple of them have got chicks there. And these are actually, kittiwakes are a gull. They're quite a dainty, small gull. This is a razorbill. These are an absolute nightmare to photograph because they are very, very dark. I've lightened this one just so you can see the eye. They are a sort of sooty dark, almost matte, and they've got a tiny little eye. You know where the eye is because it's going to be at the end of that little white stripe, little white feature. But it's a tiny little eye, and unless there's a catch light in it, it's just virtually the same colour as it said. So you get loads of shots where you can't see the bird's eye, and it just doesn't work. It makes them look dead. So that's a razorbill. It's not the best shot, but it is there to illustrate. Gannets, big birds and great fun to photograph when they're hanging on the wind. That's gannets again on the cliff, and this is a sort of bonding, breeding sort of ritual where they rub the beaks together. It's just a shame that little bit of outcrops obscuring the bird a bit, but you know, they're on a little narrow cliff ledge. Puffins, they you know, people are shocked when they first see puffins because they're much smaller than people imagine them. They're probably about the size of a blackbird. They're certainly not much bigger, and they fly really quick. But if you catch them hanging on a draft like that, you've far more chance of getting a nice sharp shot. They're not the world's best flyers. You know, they live out at sea and they use the wings to swim underwater. Yeah, little puffins, another flight shot of a puffin. It's a fulmar. It's not the sharpest of images, but I put it in because you can see that the fulmar we're used to seeing as a perfectly white head, nape of the neck and the chest. So it's quite white. This is one that turned up on Cockasans, and I was down there with my camera and I saw something flapping about on the beach, and at first I thought it was a plastic bag that somebody had dumped, which really winds me up. But then when I looked more closer through my binoculars, it was obviously a bird. So I walked out, and when I got close up, I could tell straight away it was one of the petrel family because of the tube nose. And I thought fulmar, but the colours were all wrong. So I photographed it and bumped into a birder and I said, what do you reckon this is? And I showed him it on the back of the camera and he wasn't sure. And he said, I'd like to see a bigger image. So he said, I'll give you my email address, send me a file. So I did, and he got another one of the bird recorders to look it over as well. And it turns out that it is a fulmar, but it's an Arctic species. And we'd had about 2 weeks of really windy, bad storms. And this poor bird had been blown away, of course. So it's an Arctic bird that's ended up at Cockasans, which is totally the wrong habitat for it. There's no cliffs, not much water for it to feed. And this was beached and it looked pretty tired. It's all muddy down here for the simple reason. The legs, they're designed for swimming. They spend all their time at sea. So the legs are set really far back on the body, so they can barely walk. So this was trying to get up and walk, but it kept obviously falling forward onto his chest. And I don't think it probably survived in the end. And that is the end. So thank you.